Abby Glassenberg of the blog While She Naps. Welcome to the podcast. This is a show where we can delve deeper into some of the topics discussed on the blog by having conversations with people in the online creative community. Today we're talking about Etsy. Etsy is the largest global online marketplace for handmade goods with 1 million sellers and over 3 million buyers. And it's become a household name for anyone interested in buying or selling one-of-a-kind artisan-made goods. You may have heard that Etsy made a pretty groundbreaking announcement last week. Beginning in January of 2014, sellers on the site will be allowed to hire staff, have someone else help ship their goods, and sell items they produce with manufacturing partners. These changes represent a significant shift in Etsy's policies and were met with both applause and serious trepidation from sellers and buyers alike. Some people cried out that Etsy was selling out, while others let out a sigh of relief that Etsy was finally allowing them to have a profitable business. At the heart of the discussion is the question of how we define handmade. I published a post about Etsy's new policies right after the announcement was made, and Etsy reached out to me to discuss their impact. That led to today's interview. I'm excited to be talking with Vanessa Bertozzi, who has worked at Etsy since 2007. Vanessa is currently the program manager for Etsy Wholesale. She has been the director of community and education at Etsy and the editorial director responsible for launching the Etsy blog. Welcome, Vanessa.
Hi, thanks for having me, Abby.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we're going to get started. You've worked at Etsy for a long time now. How has Etsy changed over those years?
Yeah, actually, just in your introduction, you said that there were 1 million shops and 3 million buyers, but it's actually over 30 million buyers.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Excuse my mistake there. 30 million. That's amazing.
Yeah. And I guess overall, if the question is, how have things changed since I started at Etsy? When I started, there are about 10 of us employees, including the 4 founders. And now the staff is approaching 500 employees. And the community has grown really. It really flourished. So I remember the day we passed 500,000 members total, and now, as we said, there's 1 million shops and 30 million buyers. So it's just it's really been exciting to be part of something that's taken off and been successful. Etsy at this point is a profitable company, and personally, when I think back to the early days of Etsy, it was that crazy startup atmosphere where we all wore a ton of different hats and were, running around like crazy trying to get this thing off the ground. And I remember the days where people would ask me, well, where do you work? And I'd say Etsy, and they'd say, what? and now most people I talk to have heard of it. Not everyone. We still have work to do there, but I think it's becoming closer to being a household name, which is really exciting. I think when I think about it, like the thing that remains true and has been a real through line is it's always been about Rob's original vision of people having more mindfulness when it comes to how they shop, to consumerism, and how things are made. And so I know we'll get more in depth there, but I still feel like even with these new changes in policy, it really is still rooted in that sense of mindfulness and connecting real people directly through our marketplace.
Okay. And just to clarify, could you just tell us who Rob is and who the CEO is now for people who might not know?
Rob Kalin was the original founder of Etsy. So Etsy was started in June 2005, and Chad Dickerson came on as the CTO, and over 2 years ago became the CEO. So he's now the big boss.
Okay, great. All right, so let's delve into the changes now. So Etsy recently announced the policy changes for sellers, essentially sort of redefining what they consider handmade to mean. So describe first the old approach and the old policy, and then tell me what was seen as problematic about the old way.
Yeah. So as we all know, Etsy is a marketplace for handmade goods, and where you buy directly from the people that make those goods, as well as vintage. And we define vintage as 20 plus years or older, as well as supplies. You can also sell supplies on Etsy. So, I mean, that in and of itself is a little bit confusing, and that it's not just handmade, it's vintage and supplies. But anyways, let's focus on handmade. Um, Over the years, we basically had this approach where we were trying to, you know, have Etsy stay, quote unquote, stay handmade. And so the policies just kept ballooning as we kind of, the approach was sort of like plastering on these bandages. As we saw more and more kind of loopholes or gray areas popping up, we would try to make judgment calls and then policies to address each one of these different things. And the policies just became really unwieldy and long and confusing. And we saw from the community, especially sellers and some buyers too, just being like, wait, I'm calling out this stuff because that doesn't seem handmade to me. And it was problematic for us because, we had to interpret these policies and make judgment calls, and at the same time we couldn't discuss the investigations that we had done behind the scenes because we have a policy of not discussing like the investigations that we do with a particular Etsy seller publicly. So it created a lot of a lot of strife and confusion, and people feeling like we were hiding something. And the confusion was really came down to, how do you define handmade? Some people in the community feel like handmade is really just about an individual artist making something with their own two hands. But then when you look at that, what does making something with your hands mean? What if you use a laser cutter? When Etsy started, laser cutting machines weren't even really around. Or what if you're an artist, you draw, but you send your designs out to be silk screened onto garments or bags or what have you. So we finally internally just realized, we need to take a different approach here, and make things a lot more transparent and simple. And so our focus was like, how do we get to clarity? So with the new policies, the idea is, you have to be the designer, but we're going to allow you to run your business in the way that you see fit, as long as you're really transparent about that on your Etsy shop, and disclosing whether you have employees, whether you use outside manufacturing partners, and really requiring that people be transparent about their process. So the policies are less hinged on what particular processes or production methods count and what don't, but rather like, this is about your artistic vision and expression. This is about you running the business in a way that you see fit, but just requiring you to be really open about that so that the other sellers can see what you're up to, and so that the buyer can also understand what it is, in fact, that they're buying and who they're buying from.
Okay, so now let's look at what exactly the new definition of handmade means, because so we have a three-pronged approach. So tell me what those three prongs are, and what they mean to Etsy.
Yes, so the new definition of what can be sold on the site hinges around these three principles. So this is our new approach, right? This is how we felt like we could get to a place of clarity, and at the same time really create opportunities for our sellers to grow their businesses in ways that they see fit. So it's authenticity, responsibility, and transparency. And wait, did I say authenticity? I meant authorship. So authorship is this crucial idea that you're the one that came up with the idea and that you're the designer of the work. So again, you're not allowed to sell things on Etsy that don't come from that don't originate with you. And we never have and we never will allow people to sell things that didn't originate with them. And so that's like this idea of people, big businesses coming and offloading goods that aren't their original designs. That's still not allowed.
Can I ask a clarifying question about authorship? So in my blog post, I was talking about the notion of, well, what stops IKEA from selling on Etsy, which was brought up actually at the town hall meeting press conference in which the new policies were announced, and one of the audience members asked that question. And it struck me because a few years back I had interviewed a woman named Annie Holden, who actually is the stuffed animal designer for IKEA. And it was, really interesting to speak with her. And she took me through her process of how she comes up with the designs and works with the factories overseas to have them, prototyped and tweaked and prototyped again, and choosing all of the fabrics, the embellishments, the eyes, etc. And then having them mass produced and sold under the IKEA brand. And so it is kind of interesting because all of the things that we see at IKEA, for example, or at any brand and any store, right? They're all designed by someone, right? They all hire a designer to come up with the packaging, every aspect of what we see. And so, there is authorship, but is it the idea that because they're sold under this umbrella of a larger company and not sold by, for example, Annie Holden, the IKEA designer herself, that is what disqualifies it?
Yeah, that's right. I saw your blog post about that, and I thought it was really interesting. The main difference, if you were to apply that to Etsy, say Annie applied to sell the stuffed monkey on Etsy, that application would be rejected because it's not her own business, and that IKEA, like the CEO of IKEA, isn't the one designing these products.
Okay, and he himself, I'm assuming it's a he, I actually don't know, but if the CEO of IKEA applied, not that they would, but they could, if they could, they would also be rejected regarding the stuffed monkey because it was not designed by him, it was designed by her.
That's right.
Okay, interesting. All right, so that's authorship. So what's the next of the three?
The next one is responsibility, and so this gets to another crucial piece of our policy, which is that you ultimately, as the designer, as the head of your business, you're responsible for how your items are produced, and so when we require that if you're going to use third-party manufacturing, that you have to demonstrate your responsibility for the whole production process. So what we're looking for there is to better understand your relationship with any third-party production help that you're getting, to make sure that you have really tight oversight, that you understand all these different moving parts, and that ultimately you're really invested in high quality and really understanding each piece of that. So the idea here is we don't want to let on people who come up with an idea and then just have some sort of fly-by-night arrangement where things are getting made without a really direct oversight. And that's what responsibility is about for
Okay,
us.
so again, clarifying because it's all of these issues are so complex. So would it require, for example, if I designed a plush toy and I contracted with an overseas factory to have it manufactured, which many of my friends and colleagues do, would I actually need to, for example, travel to that factory to be able to meet the workers or meet the head of the factory? I mean, to what degree do I need to sort of know what's happening?
Yeah, we would love to see that you've been and that you can personally vouch for working conditions. But we're also going to be looking for things like you've done your due diligence and in researching and selecting a third party manufacturer that you want to work with. You know, did you look at how they were certified? Did you dig a little bit deeper to better understand how they do business? And why did you select them?
So, is there going to be like safety and environmental and working conditions sort of agenda underlying these, decisions that Etsy will need to be making, with my application? Is there, is that a priority for Etsy to sort of say, well, are the working conditions okay? Are the materials you're using truly safe? Is the process damaging to the environment? Is that going to be a part of the application?
Well, we require that Etsy sellers abide by a set of ethical standards. And these are really around no child labor, no slave labor, and things like environmental and sustainable practices. I think at the end of the day, we're not in the business of becoming a regulatory entity, and we did do a lot of research into that, and we're going to be looking for the sellers to come forward and tell us what are the certifications that their manufacturing partners have, but we can't go out and visit all of these facilities ourselves and certify them. So it's something that we will definitely be looking at. But I don't, just to be completely honest, we as a company, we can't be the certifying entity.
Right, right. That makes sense. Okay, so there was one more prong, right? We didn't finish.
Yeah, and then the last prong is transparency. And so I really want to get down to brass tacks there, because the transparency is where it all hinges on this, because that's where it comes down to literally showing and publicly showing how your work is being made and how you're operating your business. And so on Etsy, you have an about page, and you have your Etsy listings. And on those pages, if you pass this application where we say, okay, you're good to go, you're responsibly operating your business, and you've proven that you're the author of this work, then you will be required to, on your about page, on your listings, perhaps elsewhere in your shop, disclose that you're using third-party manufacturers, and disclose the other people that are your employees and what their roles are, and really give more of a narrative about how you run your business and how it's grown to this point. And we really feel like this is great for a number of reasons. Number one, it just gives the whole community insight into how people are running their businesses, so that nothing feels like, Etsy or these other sellers are being secretive or getting away with something. It's really about trying to let people come out into the fresh air and be clear about how their businesses are running. And then also it's so that consumers, so that shoppers can really not only better understand how these businesses are being run and what goes into making these items, but then they can make their own informed judgment calls on where they want to spend their dollars.
Okay.
Mm.
So
I have one more
sure.
point about that, if I may.
Yes.
I Well, it's about being open and transparent, and I've used some language like people coming out into the open about this. I don't think people were necessarily hiding anything. I think there was just a lot of confusion about what was actually allowed on Etsy before. So I don't want people who do the manufacturing application and then have these elements on their Etsy shop full and open and transparent. I don't want them to feel like it's a punishment or somehow it's going to be damaging to their businesses. Um, I think it's actually something to be proud of. If that's how you want to grow your business, you should be really proud that you are, you're helping to create jobs and contribute to the economy in this way, and that you've reached a level where you're able to manage this type of business. I've spoken to some people in the Etsy forums who've been upset because they feel like, well, I'm a jeweler and these are my original designs, but a very common practice with jewelry is to send your say it's a handmade ring where I'm doing the wax model, and then I send it out to be cast. Say it's a casting company in Providence, Rhode Island. Why should I be penalized and have to do that, have to disclose that when, someone whose jewelry practice is more about sourcing beads or charms and stringing them, why is that more handmade? And I want us, I hope we're going to get to the place where we're not going to be debating what's more handmade than some other seller's process. And I think it's going to be done in a very tasteful way where it's not going to be disenfranchising someone who is using third-party manufacturing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it really does make sense. And it does to me at least. And, I think that, on the one hand, there is a lot of work that goes into, for example, casting that yourself, if you could do that as a home process, or doing all the work for whatever craft you do with your own two hands.
Right.
There's also, though, a tremendous amount of work involved in growing. Just for example, in the most simple way of just hiring one other employee, the amount of work that it takes to hire and manage one other employee is tremendous. Not to mention everything else that would be involved if you were going to, have kits printed and made and put together for you, or all of these other things. It even to hire a factory to make something for you, it's a ton of work to do that. So in other words, I guess, even when you sort of expand, it doesn't mean that you're not doing any work anymore.
Right.
You are doing just as much, if not more work, to have to sort of grow that business.
Yeah, I think you're right, and it's different work. And at the end of the day, we think it's all really valid, and it's all really exciting. Like I'm thrilled by this incredible work that's one of a kind, and it's one artist's vision and labor and just expertise that's gone into that one item. And I think there's a story to be told there. And then I am also really excited by someone who's, decided to, there's enough demand and they want to take their business in the direction where they're using third-party help or hiring on employees. And I just think at the end of the day, we want it all to be out there and really visually and through the personal narratives of the artist, just really open.
So, to what degree was the new policy made in order to hang on to these sort of very successful, high demand sellers who are, really selling a lot of product? Because I'm sure in the forums and elsewhere, people have said in a sort of accusatory way, well, every time an item is listed and sold, right, Etsy profits. And so this is just a way to sort of hang on to those sellers who are listing and selling and listing and selling with huge volume. So to what degree, what is the response to that?
Mm. Well, Etsy's stance, and one of the reasons why I think it's a great place to work personally, is that the success of the Etsy community is our success as well. So the more sellers that are doing well, the better off the company is. And that's a really, just to be totally frank about it, that's our financial arrangement with our community. And so, yeah, I think part of the decision was it was really heartbreaking to see really successful sellers kind of, use Etsy as a launching pad, but then move on. And we want to be a marketplace and a destination where you find, not just emerging artists, not just people who are doing it for pleasure, for fun, for hobby, but professional people as well. And I'm not saying that all professionals leave Etsy right now, but there's a certain number of people that we're hoping will be able to stay or come back. Yeah, totally. It's not the only reason that went into these policy changes. As we mentioned at the beginning of the interview, the policies were so confusing for our community. They were also confusing for us internally. We spun our wheels a lot trying to manage, and enforce this policy that was just hard to interpret and be consistent and fair-minded. So there's that, and then I think the other thing is over since 2005. There has been this larger shift beyond just the walls of Etsy. There's been a larger shift in the nature of manufacturing, and I think there's a more general awareness, especially in the U.S., about small manufacturing, local manufacturing, sustainable manmanufacturing, and there's with the recession, economic situation. There's a real moment right now for small business and entrepreneurship, and we wanted to be part of that. We were at a bit of a crossroads where we go one direction, tighten our policies, have a tighter definition of handmade, and kick off a bunch of people off the site, and basically have to become more like a jury site. Or go in this other direction where we're more of a platform for small business. And that can mean handmade, one of a kind, just you, or it can mean a growing small business where you're bringing on employees and doing micro manufacturing, using new tools like laser cutters or 3D printers. So it's a number of reasons. Not just hanging on to sellers who are leaving or thinking of leaving, but more clarity for us, our community, and internally, and also this larger context of, our chance to have a real economic impact.
Yeah, and setting yourself up to be able to participate in sort of new technologies and in the way micro businesses are going to be run going forward.
Yeah, and so when we came up with these new policies, we knew that we wanted them to be able to endure the test of time, and so the approach had to be different. And so we really wanted to boil it down to the real elemental, crucial aspects, that authorship, responsibility, transparency, and have less of this approach of as I said before, just plastering on these caveats and trying to cover over loopholes. So we really tried to create the policies and to be future thinking and to anticipate, there's probably going to be new technologies and new ways of doing businesses that pop up that that we can't even imagine right now.
Right. That's definitely true. So that actually brings me to my last question, which is, what do you think Etsy is going to look like 5 years from now?
Oh my God, I have to say, considering the amount of change that I've witnessed since I've been at Etsy almost 7 years, 5 years from now, whew, uh, in a way, I could go crazy in that kind of like imagining the science fiction future of Etsy, Etsy on the moon. But I think, yeah, I mean, just picking up back up on this notion of this, what I hope is not just a trend, but a real movement that continues to grow, where consumers are more mindful of and conscious and informed about how and where things are made and who they're buying from. If that's the case, then I think that 5 years from now, Etsy will be full of businesses that are working in really interesting ways, where technology is helping people to work more efficiently, creatively, perhaps partnering with small manufacturers locally will become easier, as well as maybe we'll see more partnerships across the world that are facilitated through technology. I think that's something that's really important to Etsy, is that this isn't just about handmade in the USA. This is really about a global movement, and trying to help small businesses all over the world. So I think Etsy will continue to be more and more global, and but I think if we're going to stay true to what we really feel passionate about, and what I think is distinctive about Etsy, it's gotta remain true to real people, to artists and creative people who aren't just making these business decisions, but also are really taking a leap into how they want to run their lives, and being their own bosses, and getting their work out there. That's something that I think really gets to why Etsy can be so inspiring. It's because it's just incredible to see artists and creative people put their work out there, and I'm hoping there'll be lots of unexpected new ways that they'll do that, and they'll do that with Etsy.
Yeah, I'm excited to see the future. I've been an Etsy seller since July of 2005, so I've ridden all of these waves, and I'm still there. I still plan to be there, and I'm just really fascinated to see how it unfolds going forward, because this is a significant shift.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, I wanted to say to your listeners, I know that there's a lot of anxiety amongst the community and in the forums, chatting with people. People are really scared because it's sort of opening up to the unknown. And I think that once we start showing some of these stories of the types of businesses that these new policies are going to be really empowering to, I think that everyone's going to feel a lot better, once they see in actuality what right now seems really abstract.
And that'll start in January.
Yeah, if not sooner. I mean, we're already getting people applying to work with manufacturers, and yeah, hopefully we'll be able to share those stories really soon.
Interesting. Great. Well, Vanessa, thank you so much for sharing Etsy's perspective with us. It's been great talking to you.
Abby, thanks so much for having me. This has been really great.
Yay. And for listeners, if anything we've talked about in the interview has raised questions for you, or if you have comments or ideas to share with me or with Vanessa, I'd invite you to join the discussion by writing a comment on this post on my blog, walshynaps.com. I'm Abby Glassenberg. Thank you so much for joining me today.